Donald Trump is once again the President of the United States. What happened? What now? What does it mean for the world? And what does it mean for Filipinos both here and abroad? Hello and welcome. I am Bea Cupin, Rappler senior reporter covering security, diplomacy, and international relations. You are watching Rappler's special panel discussion on the U.S. presidential election. Joining us here in the studio are Rappler editor-at-large Marites Vitug, Ricky Carandang, who was part of the Aquino cabinet as Secretary of the Presidential Communications Development and Strategic Planning Office.
That's a mouthful.
It's quite a mouthful. Herman Kraft, Professor of Political Science at UP Diliman. He is also an expert in international relations and international security. Rappler CEO Maria Ressa is joining us via teleconference. Nerve researcher and writer Gaby Baizas, who studied data on the American electorate ahead of the elections, is also joining us. And later in the show, we'll have Rappler Plus member Patrick Lubenia, who covered the election in the all-important swing state of Pennsylvania, which of course went to Trump. And later on, political analyst Ronald Llamas, who was political advisor to the late President Noynoy Aquino, will also be joining us. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us. Before we deep dive on what it means for the Philippines, let's talk about what now, what happened, how we got here, and also how are we feeling? It's been a little under a week since the elections in the United States.
I think the most emotional here maybe should start.
Is that supposed to be me?
No, I read your piece in Esquire, so go ahead.
Maybe you should start. That's right.
Okay, well, to your question, Bea, about what happened, I think if you take a look at American polls, all the polls, whether it was right or left wing, said that Americans were deeply unhappy about the state of their country. Yeah. It didn't matter if you were a Republican or you were a Democrat. They were just very unhappy about it. I won't go into the details of why. There's a whole bunch of discussions about that. But both campaigns saw that, and they offered themselves as change agents. Kamala Harris was offering change, though, within institutional norms, within processes that exist. And Donald Trump was offering sweeping, dramatic change. The difference between the two of them, Kamala was offering slow and steady change, and Donald Trump was not offering incremental change. The Democrats were offering incremental change. And it goes to the state of the voters that a majority of the voters voted for Trump. That's the first time a Republican has won the popular vote since George W. Bush in 2004. Yes. So that shows you that it's not an electoral college thing. Yeah. He won outright, fair and square. And that's because people were sick and tired of the promise of incremental change. And they were willing to gamble their future on something that could offer possibly more dramatic and more meaningful change. I think there are many other reasons, right? People will blame the Democrats, they'll blame the campaign. But the bottom line, I think, is that incremental change lost out to dramatic change.
Yeah, I think for my perception is the misogyny, the anti-women rhetoric of Trump and a lot of his followers, I think also became very effective. I mean, Kamala Harris is a woman, and she's not only a woman, she's black. So I think that played into the perceptions of voters. And aside from, again, there are so many factors. And what I understand, Ricky, is the economy of the U.S. is doing so well. If you look at the macro figures, yet the voters were really complaining of inflation, how tough their lives were.
Right, but if you take a look at the inflation numbers, because everyone's saying that inflation had been tamed.
Right.
And that's true. But in absolute terms, the prices of basic commodities had already gone up so much since the last 4 years, right? I don't think it's Biden's fault. I think Biden actually tamed inflation. But starting from when eggs were what they were in 2020 to where they are in 2024, even if you say, well, inflation has been tamed, the fact of the matter is I'm paying 30, 40% more.
It's hard to debate against the lived experience of your average voter. In the
exactly.
Let's go to Maria quickly. Maria, what happened and how are you taking the results of the 2024 presidential election?
I think I'm going to pull together what Ricky and what Marites said, right? Let's look at the stats, and then I'm going to go back to the study that Nerve did on the U.S. information ecosystem. I think the first one is you have to look at this as because I'd say even media coverage failed pieces of it, right? They will say the Trump voters, so as Ricky said, first time, a popular vote for Trump, right? And the two issues that they talk about is inflation and immigration. Inflation is down to 2.5 in September. Immigration, the border crossings have been going down since 2021. So fact versus perception. We know what Imelda said, perception determines reality. And I think from there alone, what you can begin to see is the impact of disinformation. And I'd say 8 years of disinformation. The other part that goes hand in hand with that is you take a look at, Marites mentioned misogyny. Where does all of this stuff fit in? What is, if you go deeper than the easy parts that you can tell why you voted for Trump, you can see that the core is actually going back to both misogyny and white supremacy, underlying everything. And let's look at some of the stats. 52% of white women and 60% of white men voted for Trump. Of his gains from the 18 to 26-year-olds brought young men of many different Black, Latino, young men whose families will wind up being deported, and this literally voting against their own interests. Why? A, they don't facts. B, we live in an information ecosystem that rewards lies, meaning they get the widest distribution, and incites fear, anger, and hate, right? So a lot of the media analysis in the US is focusing on, oh, they're new bros, it's podcasts. Oh, it's been 8 years of an information ecosystem, a public information ecosystem that is rewarding lies,
Right.
fear, anger, and hate. And so have this going down. I'd say the last part, which is the connection to us, right? So you have the impact of disinformation. We've seen a lot of these things. A lot of the things that now President-elect Trump said were things Duterte had said, down to the microphone. You guys remember the microphone, right? Where it was like a blowjob. I mean, like,
Yeah.
bleep, but beyond that, down to threatening journalists, down to all of these things are very familiar to us. But what will this do? If at the top in January this year, our VDEM in Sweden said 71% of the world is under authoritarian rule. Will this be the tipping point against democracy, right? Because America now has really moved right. So the question there is, how will that impact? And we really won't know that until after President Trump takes office, like as President Marcos, right? I mean, look, we went from hell to purgatory. So hopefully President Trump will bring, I joke that the Philippines, Brazil, we were ahead. We went from hell to purgatory. The West is about to go to hell.
Yeah.
I'm smiling.
Sir, okay, I promise not to call you sir, but sir, there was some hope, right, before election day, right? Polls showed that it would be a really close race. There was hope na momentum was on Harris's side and the Democrat side. There was a lot of hype. She raised a lot of money. You had A-list celebrities, and then you have Trump over here, a convicted felon, accused of spewing offensive racist language, etc., and yet he's going to become number 47. How are you making sense of this?
I can't. If you think about it, right? I think one of the things that came out of those points that you actually raised, Kamala was actually was ahead as far as getting campaign funds and all of that. There was this, you could see that as far as Trump was actually concerned, he was making all of these noises that really most of us who are normal listeners, right, would find disgusting and all. So the funny thing about all of those was that Kamala never really actually had any lead, right? Despite all of those things, and this goes back to what Maria was actually talking about regarding the question of disinformation, right? given the amount of money that was raised by the Harris campaign, you'd actually expect that they'd be able to trump as far as messaging was actually concerned, right? But it didn't happen, right? In other words, if you look at the situation, at no time during the campaign period, was there any comfortable sense that Harris was actually ahead of Donald Trump, right? So just given that, I think that was already indicative that as early as at that point, the Harris campaign was already in trouble, right? So there were questions that were being directed at me in terms of what was my, before the election itself, right? What was my fearless forecast? And I'm saying, I might be leaning towards, veering towards the idea of a Harris victory, but I didn't feel I wasn't comfortable that was where we were going, even as early as that.
I think it's better to call them fearful forecasts, given the situation. But again, going back to Trump, you raised a very good point there. Do we have consensus on whether did he win despite of how he acted in his first term, how he acted on the campaign despite his promises, or did he win because of who he is? It's not just even because of how he acted, no, because of who he is.
I mean, if you think about it, right? We were always saying that the American electorate seemed to be divided into three groups, right? The Trump base, around 30% of the electorate. Those who were actually against Trump, another 30% voting for the Democrats. And then you had this sizable number in the middle, or at least that was what we were thinking of, right? Based on that, those that constituted the Trump base, would have voted for him regardless because of him, right? So we were expecting the rest, around 70%, 60 to 70% of the electorate, would actually make a choice. A third would basically vote against him no matter what, right? So we were talking about that middle, and it seems like initially we thought that the numbers were more or less up for grabs, right? But it seems like, given the results that we're seeing now, it's not a question of in spite of Trump, right? Meaning to say that Donald Trump was not the one that actually pushed this the middle to actually vote for him, but rather it seems like it's the messaging. Meaning to say that it's the issues that he was actually talking about that made the middle actually go in his favor, as opposed to, of course, the idea that that they would actually be so disgusted by what he was actually saying, that they would actually go the other way. But it seems like it's the message, right? Which goes back to an earlier point that was being made regarding what is the question of, did the Democrats go wrong as far as the issues that they were actually raising, right? And it seems like their focus, and a lot of analysts have said that the focus on Trump himself, seemed to be the wrong way to go about it. That there should have been some emphasis on the issues that were actually being raised by Donald Trump against the. I think more emphasis could have been given on the success of the Biden economy, for instance. But as Ricky was actually pointing out earlier on, it's the lived experience, right?
Yeah.
Meaning to say that you can talk about inflation actually going down, but people are still paying a lot for their groceries, right? And so it's very difficult to actually go against that particular point in time. So it was an uphill battle for the Democrats in general.
Kumbaga sa Pilipinas, hindi naman nakakain yung pagbaba ng inflation. Mahal pa rin yung pagkain. Maria, you were mentioning earlier how this did not happen in a vacuum, obviously, and that in fact Harris was not unburdened by what came before her. Connecting again to that question, did Trump win despite of who he is or because of who he is? And how do you connect that to the info environment you were talking about earlier that basically incentivizes people to be hateful, to be divisive?
That's exactly it. Look, I think if the vote had been held in the first month when Biden stepped down and Kamala Harris came up, she might have won, right? But you have to understand this was always the challenge they would have. Big tech, the distribution system of information weighs in on the side of lies, fear, anger, and hate. And that was always going to be the biggest hurdle she would have had to face, aside from being a woman, being South Asian, and then coming in with that. So first is really, it's the public information ecosystem. We are seeing the impact of 8 years of lies. Actually, if you think about it, right? Like it was Yuri Andropov, the former KGB chair, former head of the Soviet Union, second gen of the Soviet Union, who said that disinformatia is like cocaine. You take it once or twice, you're okay. But if you take it all the time, you become an addict, a changed person. So talking to Americans who don't even realize, actually, it's all around the world, the vote, Filipinos included, right? When we walk into 2025, lies, the reason some of the people voted, the majority, the reason he got the popular vote was that the people have actually said they didn't have the facts. They voted based on emotion, hacked our biology, made us angry, afraid, and then it changed the way we looked at the world, which changed the way we voted. That's, I think, the first. The second one is that in the past, what you were saying about inflation, right? In the past, a good leader can heal those divides. That's what leadership aspired to, right? Oh, prices are up. Please bear with us. This is what we are doing to bring it down. People used to listen. We don't have that anymore because we are far too fragmented. In fact, as I think Nerve will tell you, there's a generational gap that we've never had before either, because 60% of 18 to 35 in America get their news from social media, meaning they do not get news. They will get propaganda, they will get insight, right? And then finally, the last one is, let's go all the way back to what started this propaganda war, which was in 2000. A survey came out that said that the white majority will become a minority. And then you then had the big tech, social media come in with insidious manipulation. In the Nerve report, we identified 7 layers of manipulation of the American public. And then you have this. This is the natural progression of 8 years of big tech. And the phrase that others have used for this now is that America is now under a broligarchy. The bros of Silicon Valley and an oligarchy in a different way, right? I mean, I'm actually looking for help from the global south now. Because Brazil, for example, has put information integrity as part of the G20 agenda. It's information integrity. It's facts, truth, and trust. This is the natural progression.
Yeah, thanks, Maria. Maria mentioned the Nerve report, and we're going to toss it to Gaby. The Nerve team came out with this very fascinating June this year? Report on the U.S. electorate. Among the jarring findings of that report was that although mataas yung internet and media literacy ng Gen Z, for instance, tama ba, Gabi? They trust a lot of political opinions on social media. But before that, I want to thank Maria for joining us. She is quite busy today. And Maria has mga 1 or 2 more months to overanalyze the results of the 2024 presidential elections. I'm sure we'll see that on Rappler and beyond. Again, thanks for joining us, Maria. Gabi, what happened? Bakit ganon? Mataas yung media, yung internet savvy rather. They use social media, but they don't trust mainstream media, but at the same time they trust political opinions on social media. Why is that?
Yeah, well, I guess it's something that everyone, like us at the Nerve, who've been studying propaganda, disinformation for years. And of course, as Maria mentioned, didn't just happen in a vacuum. It's been, we've been losing information integrity for the past 8 years. So what we're seeing now is that we have a very fragmented information ecosystem. So everyone's getting their news from like different sources, whereas, of course, like before social media, everyone had their, traditional media, they had their different sources of mainstream media. And right now, social media has, allowed everyone to become a publisher pretty much. So that allowed everybody to become like a quote unquote, like, source of information, like a quote unquote journalist, if you will. So of course, and of course, with social media, Maria also mentioned this earlier, that there's a lot of like emotionally charged content on social media, especially in the lead up to elections. Emotions are heightened. Everyone gets so invested in their, preferred candidate. So of course, it'll be easy for you to get away and to get carried away if you come across a piece of content online that caters to your preconceived beliefs, like the beliefs that you already hold, the emotions that you already have been holding on to for some time. So for instance, like it's really interesting how sometimes like we've seen on either party that sometimes they don't always like rely on facts anymore. They just rely on really like trying to evoke a certain emotion out of you. Like they just want to say like, okay, so we're going to make again, like we're going to improve America because we're going to. And then Marie also said something about divides. They like to exploit that now. So they try to make you hate each other. So you have like white people hating people of color. You also have like men like having more like you've been seeing more misogynistic content online as well. So it's a lot of like hateful rhetoric and emotional rhetoric now. So I guess it's really because people get carried away by their emotions. And even though like Gen Z supposedly they grew up with social media, but it doesn't mean that they're immune to propaganda. I've been seeing that online personally, na parang Gen Z is like immune to propaganda. And I thought like, that's not the case, no?
Right.
Like you could be like very internet savvy, very social media savvy. But of course, as long as you have beliefs, as long as you have values, as long as you have morals, like definitely like you could fall victim to any kind of propaganda as well. And we've seen that a lot in the US election.
And on that very heartwarming note, we'll return to you later, Gabi. I was laughing earlier kasi ang lungkot ng findings ng NERV. Let's focus on the Democrats. Pundits now Democrats are blaming themselves. Pundits are saying there were fundamental flaws in the Democratic campaign. It goes beyond Harris, of course. They're saying that, again, like it was mentioned in the panel kanina, no, na hindi nag-resonate sa working class, sa majority ng US voters, yung messaging ng Democrats. There's also criticism that the Democrats have defeat coming because of policies that have long alienated the ordinary Americans. May hot take pa na they no longer represent the working class in the US. There has also been finger pointing over Joe Biden's late decision to drop out of the race. He shouldn't have ran in the first place, etc., etc. So I suppose, as our contemporaries in the US have and are doing, it's our turn to point fingers. What went wrong? What did they do wrong? What could have they done better?
Back to my original point. The Democrats were offering incremental change. And everything, and again, they ran a fantastic campaign. I'm not going to fault the strategists of the Democrats, but their fundamental belief in democracy forced them to offer only incremental change. That's their belief. That's their value system. And so, and everything they did reinforced that. When she reached across the aisle to Liz Cheney, what was that to other people? That was the establishment closing ranks. When they had George Clooney and Beyonce, these are the elites. It's the elites. They're all ganging up on us.
But he had Elon Musk.
But Elon Musk is not a
like
typical elite, right?
He's
He's kind of outside the bounds of decent behavior. So he's managed to identify himself as outside the elites. And let's point out one fact, that Trump was funded by a lot of corporates, by a lot of the elites, but they were smart enough to keep their mouths shut.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right? And so I don't want to spend too much time blaming the Democrats because they couldn't have done anything else. But again, if you, as Maria said, and as you've all said, it's created this emotional surge of and a need for urgency. And incrementalism doesn't work with a sense of urgency. And that was, they couldn't. I'm Monday morning quarterbacking because I thought she was going to win. Maybe that was hopeful thinking. But in looking back, if that was the tactic, wasn't going to work.
Yeah. What does this mean, Marites, for the capital D Democrats?
Oh my God. My fear really is that, America has turned right. It has become like almost solidly conservative. But my fear as someone living in the Philippines and, with looking at other countries in the world, that I don't know if you'll agree with me, but we look at America as the beacon of democracy, we look at their institutions, their judiciary used to be independent, their media, they're robust, they put down a president, Nixon. They've done all the things that we would have wanted to do here in the Philippines, that our media could lead to dramatic changes. But now, under Trump, my fear is that, it will weaken the democracy of America, which we look up to, and it might influence. I think you were saying earlier in our conversation, Herman, that when Trump won in his first term, that you saw a shift to the right among other countries. So that's really my fear.
But I think that's kind of a good thing. I'll tell you why. No, I'll tell you why.
You're back straight.
We have romanticized and idealized our relationship with America to the point where Filipinos think they're just going to come to our aid just because. We're the little brown brother. Maybe this will shake us off of that. That will shake that sort of idealism off of us. And we can view our relationship with America in a more clear-headed and more pragmatic manner instead of expecting them to save us from all of our ills.
I'm not going to that extent.
No, I know you're not, but that's the general feeling of ordinary Filipinos.
Yeah.
That's why when you had Trump as president in 2016, there were two countries that had overwhelming support for Trump. Foreign countries.
Philippines.
Israel and the Philippines.
Yeah.
When George W. Bush invaded Iraq and he was vilified by the rest of the world, where were the two countries where he had above 50% approval rating? Israel and the Philippines.
Yeah.
That's my point. I think we start to see them. I don't know. If we start to see them in a more realistic, pragmatic manner, number one, we will start to think that maybe we can have our own ideas. Maybe we don't have to take the American Constitution and force fit it onto our country, which has a different history and a different culture.
Yeah.
Maybe we start thinking for ourselves.
But that started, I think, during Duterte's regime.
What?
That he was against the U.S. and that he wanted to distance the Philippines from the U.S. And so we had to go to Russia. We bought
helicopters.
and then India. We also bought from India.
Got arms from China.
So again, now Trump 2.0. For me, I think the burden, or I think Japan, South Korea, Australia. We should look, as you said, look at the region and not just
Although I think
rely
we
on
are
it.
better suited now because of the Duterte era. Parang kumbaga na built in yung relationships na yun. But we're gonna talk about that a little more extensively later. Sir, what does this mean? Sir, ako nang sir sa'yo. What does this mean for the Democrats, for liberal democracy? Yung bigger picture palalo?
I know.
In the U.S., right? One of the issues that was raised in favor of that favored the Trump campaign was this question of parang nagtatapunan kasi ng di ba? Sabi ng Democrats, pasista si Trump. So yung danger ng So he's a danger to democracy. But the other side, the Republicans, or at least those who supported Trump in particular, were actually saying na parang yung danger sa democracy nanggagaling doon sa kaliwa right? So it was actually the left that was a danger to democracy, right? So there was this sense that parang democracy was in danger from both sides, right? So it was a question of saan ka mas alin yung nakikita mo na threat.
Ano yung nagre-resonate?
So right now, I think in the US there's that tension, that there's a tug of war, kaninong narrative about threats, to democracy ang kailangan pakinggan, but if you think about this then, so the question now arises, and I'm really fascinated by Ricky's point about incremental change versus this notion of
Napastraight yung upo ni Mama Marites.
Oo nga.
pero what's interesting about that particular distinction, no? Both are about change. It's just a question of how quickly do you want that, and who's going to be the agent of change, no? So the issue that comes out is that the Democrats want change within the rules, right? Yeah. And then, of course, here's Trump through his rhetoric, no, and the things that he's saying. Remember, he is the one who said that on his first day, he's going to be a dictator, right? Yeah. Isang ano. And then there's, if you take a look at yung what the Heritage Foundation came out with, no, Trump might actually say that he was not part of the creation of that particular Project 2025, no, but at the same time, I don't think that he's denying that the ideas there are things that he's not in favor of, right? Hindi sinasabi yun, no? So, sa madaling sabi, right now, we're looking precisely at what it is that Donald Trump will actually do, no? When he finally takes over, no? And in the meantime, I think the Democrats can, wring their hands, no, and try to find out and look back and say what is it that actually happened during the campaign. But I think right now it's that swing towards a much more a desire to see change, no, more radical change, more not the kind of incremental change. Kaya nga parang pag pumasok ka doon sa inflation, right? That question about inflation, for instance, no. Doing things institutionally through the kinds of processes that the U.S. government actually does, no, of course, tamed inflation, okay, but that's not enough, right? So for Americans, for those who voted for Trump, they wanted to see something. Parang yung sense kasi na walang ginawa yung Biden administration, right? So
which is not true.
Which is not true. Pero yun nga, ang ano kasi yung sense na na something has to be tangible, in terms of something
parang
that
inayos nyo pero wala namang nangyari sa amin.
Parang they're waiting for somebody like Trump to say you're fired, right? Parang ganon yung ano eh.
Which is sad because he did a lot of really progressive things. Biden, he forgave student debt. Let's not forget it was the Republicans who tried to stop that from happening, right? He strengthened the unions.
Correct.
It's just, I guess, I mean, those are substantial, meaningful, on the ground, real life things. I think it was just too little, too late. And it goes back to your point and Maria's point. There's just too much misinformation and social media triggering out there that those things were seen as incremental. Right? Whether they were or not is not up to me. But the voters saw them as incremental and not enough, obviously, because they went for someone else.
Or maybe the voters did not learn about it at all.
Well, if you were a student, you certainly didn't have to pay your loan. Right? I mean, and that was, there may be other people who didn't feel it enough, right? So I guess that's part of it.
At this point, we're going to bring in Patrick Lubenia. He's a Rappler Plus member who is taking his PhD in industrial engineering at the University of Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania. He is joining us online from there. Hi, Patrick. You witnessed the elections there. Nag-ikot si Patrick for Rappler on election day. Pennsylvania was a must-win for either candidate, and it went for Trump. So what's the mood there mga 1 week after election day, right? What are the vibes?
On the day after the election, actually, you could feel that people were crestfallen. Feel mo yung disappointment. And nakisabay pa yung panahon. Napaka-dreary dito. And surprisingly though, the day after, mukhang nahimasmasan na yung mga tao. I guess the speech of Kamala really helped. And also, because we knew that we were disappointed, pero hindi pwedeng magtagal yung ganong emotion, knowing that there's long 4 years ahead of us. So we had to be strong. I remember two people telling me, now what irked them was when Trump lost in 2016, the most that his supporters felt was disappointment. Pero tayo, once when Kamala lost, we dreaded the outcome. But yeah, I guess that fueled the desire to not really move on, but at least move forward as soon as we could.
So you emphasized kanina yung parang, hindi naman na naka-move on siguro kaagad, no? Pero there was cognizance na you can't dwell and be sad for too long. Ano yung discussions ngayon with, especially international students, I would think, no, na, especially those who did not vote and could not vote in the elections, like how are they processing Trump's win, and how are they foreseeing the next 4 years under a Trump presidency?
Yeah, I was talking to my classmates the day after, and we felt the same thing. We couldn't really sleep well, even if we wanted to wait for the results of the election. But I guess it helps also that we are in a very democratic area. So here in Pittsburgh, it's reliably blue. So a part of us can just live in our bubble for the meantime. At least that helps us carry on in the next 4 years, but still being aware of the things happening around us. But yeah, it really helps na nasa Democratic County ako, na Allegheny. So it helps us process things easier here. Hindi kasing lala nung dread, because we know that we are being protected here by fellow Democrats.
Yeah, I'll be asking the panel this also. And I think, Patrick, napag-usapan natin to sa group chats natin in the days after. Yung feeling na it's like 2022 in the Philippine context. So, how have you been processing that? Yung parang, I guess, the shock, the stunning results of the 2022 presidential elections, and now the stunning results of the 2024 presidential election in the US.
Yeah, so I was telling my friends, this is my second straight heartbreak after Lenny, now Kamala. But I guess it's also helpful na na-experience ko na ito. So I knew how to deal with this emotion already. Now that it's happening again. So really, it's a flashback to 2022. But then again, after that May 13 speech by Lenny, nakatulong din yun na maka-move forward even if not move on. And I'm happy that Kamala gave that speech like the day after. So it was much quicker that way to process our emotions.
Right. So Patrick, baka you can help your classmates who might be having a hard time processing the results because, been there, done that, still in there. Thank you so much for joining us, Patrick. Ingat ka dyan sa
You're welcome.
Yeah. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Ingat ka.
Habang minamic
Salamat
yung
po.
Thank you. Habang minamic pa yung isang panelist natin na magbibigay ng solusyon si Sir mamaya eh. He will solve democracy for us. Nabanggit na rin natin, we've been mentioning earlier yung the appeal of a quick solution. Yung impatience of the electorate. I am having 2016 flashbacks, no. Yung gusto nila mabilis, gusto natin agad-agad, change is coming, ika nga.
Yeah.
According to Rodrigo Duterte. Is this a global? Is this just a US Philippine thing?
No, it's
Are
not.
we seeing this across the world? And if we are, what's happening? Ikaw muna, sir. Ano na yung solution natin?
Kasi mash up to ng 2016 and 2022.
Well, meron naman talaga mga comparison. Pero mahirap din kasi talagang sabihin na magkapareho. No? Dahil tama naman yung pinag-uusapan nyo na meron naman talagang populist upheaval na nangyayari all over the place. No?
Yeah.
Latin America, Middle East, no? Europe, no? Especially sa Eastern Europe. No? Kaya habang may mga parallelisms, may mga differences din. Halimbawa, yung isang pagkakapareho ay yung runway ni Trump ay medyo mahaba. even before siya nanalo ng 2016, kilala na siya.
Yes.
No? You are fired, no? Nagmarka na siya.
Celebrity.
Diba? Oo. Nung natalo siya, ay ang taas pa rin ng boto niya. Higher than Obama. Natalo na siya noon, ha? Pero ang taas pa rin ng kanyang boto. Ibig sabihin, the base remain. Pero ang magaling sa kanya ay yung kanyang weaknesses, yung uprising, yung mga kaso laban sa kanya, na-weaponize niya. No? Na-weaponize niya yung mga kaso sa kanya
Pinakitaan pa nga.
as the weakness of American democracy in his favor. Diba? Kaya yung dapat sana ay the first presidential candidate na may conviction, nabaliktad niya. Siya pa ngayon ang biktima ng sistema. Diba? Tapos yung uprising ay tinulungan siya ng US Supreme Court na immune talaga siya dyan. Kahit ano palang gawin mo, kahit ikaw, basta ikaw ay incumbent president, kahit ipapatay mo yung rival mo, immune ka. No? Kaya iba yung narrative ni Trump. No? At halimbawa, wala akong maalala kay Kamala offhand. Halimbawa, pag tinanong mo, what defined Kamala? No? Marami ka sasabihin na platform, marami ka sasabihin na mga policy, etc. Pero walang marka.
Kasi,
diba?
Maiksi
107 days lang yung...
Well, kahit kasi...
niya, hindi pa rin siya nakilala.
Exactly. Paano kahit yung vice president siya, talagang siya yung classic spare tire. No? Wala siyang definition.
Because Biden had plans of running. I mean, they didn't have plans pala to let someone else run.
Yeah. Pero, halimbawa, siyempre, mahalaga yung objective condition. Diba? Mahalaga yung objective condition. Halimbawa, si Trump nakinabang dun sa economic reforms ni Obama. Diba? Kaya nagmukhang successful yung kanyang economy nung siya ay presidente. Ngayon, ay baka makinabang siya uli dito kay Biden. Dahil na-bring down ni Biden yung inflation to 2%. Pero hindi yun ang naalala ng mga American electorate. Ang naalala nila was the 9%. Ngayon, yung mga reforms na ginawa ni Biden, definitely, si Trump at saka si Vance ang makikinabang. Kaya nga yung ibang mga kausap kong Democrats, naghahanda sila for a long conservative winter. No? Dahil, ayun nga beneficiary sila nito. Tapos ngayon, meron ka sweeping mandate. No? So, yes, yung objective condition ay nandyan. Pero mas magaling si Trump na i-weaponize yung kanyang weaknesses into something positive at yung positive kay Biden at saka kay Kamala gawing negative. No? Ibig sabihin, mas magaling siya ron. At sa isang tight race sa 7 swing states, kaunting pagkakamali ay nagagamit ni Trump. A month before the election, sinabi ni Kamala, siya ay nagtrabaho sa McDonald's. Anong ginawa ni Trump kinabukasan? Pumunta sa McDonald's at nagluto ng French fries. A week before the election, sinabi ni Biden na garbage yung kanyang mga supporters. Kinabukasan, anong ginawa ni Trump? Sumakay ng garbage truck. No? So, ibig sabihin ng ganung mga tight na lugar ay siya yung nakinabang. Dahil tight nga at kaunting pagkakamali, gamit kagad.
Yung truck driving stunt niya, by the way, if you listen to the liberal media, para siyang tanga na nakakatawa. But if you listen to, say, Fox News, it resonated with the average, which also goes back to what Gaby was saying earlier, and it's such a divided information system. Talagang magkakaibang mundo. People are living in which is also what is happening in the Philippines currently. We live in very different realities because of our information spaces.
Pero nagulat ako, Bea, nung exit polls. Iba kasi exit polls sa US Sa atin kasi exit polls, sino yung binoto? Sa kanila, ano yung basihan sa pagboto?
Ano yung basis mo?
Nagulat ako, 3/4 ay critical sa Biden government, discontento sa... Inaasahan ko majority. Because of immigration, because of inflation, because of being an incumbent. Mas marami ibabato sa'yo. Pero 3/4, nagulat ako ron na ganun ka dismayado yung botante. Kaya nga, for the first time sa history ng Democrats, mas maraming bumoto na independent kaysa Democrats. Ibig sabihin, even within the Democratic Party, may mga hindi bumoto.
May rejection.
No? Especially yung mga young people na galit sa genocide sa Gaza.
Ayun, that's
Yan,
one issue.
yung mga ganun ba, no? Na nag-make ng difference, possibly, doon sa swing states.
Yeah.
Dahil very tight nga. Kung sarili mong partido, di mo mapaboto, malaking problema mo. No?
Either bumaliktad sa'yo or hindi na lang lumabas at all kasi walang gana bumoto.
Yes, kaya nga kung kukumpara mo yung boto, mismo sa women bumaba yung boto ni Biden noong 2020 do sa boto ngayon ni Kamala. Even women na inaasahan nila, yun yung tatabo ng botante at supporters. Hispanics at saka Asians, parehas bumaba. Ang medyo na-maintain lang yung blacks no? Pero yung key demographic areas, no? Dati kasi noong 2020, nakuha ni Biden yung mga hindi college graduates, yung mga high school graduates. Ngayon, bumalik ka Trump. No? So, very fundamental. No? Di naman ako fully agree sa sinabi ni Bernie Sanders na naiwan na namin, nahiwalay kami sa aming base, sa aming working class base, at kami ay na-identify sa elites at saka sa status quo. Pero there's also something there, no? Na kinakailangan ng Democrats na mag-soul searching.
I want to toss it to Ricky, who also served in a cabinet that
Yeah.
stood for liberal
We were together.
democracy. Yes. What does this mean for liberal ideals in the U.S. and the rest of the world, I suppose?
I think they are in retreat. But I'll make a distinction because you can't say the rest of the world, right?
Okay.
This is more acute in certain countries, the US, the UK. And I point this out because there's a through line that runs through that, in my opinion, which people are free to disagree with. But I think capitalism has morphed into this Frankenstein monster, and it has chipped away at social protections. Franklin Roosevelt said if you were poor, there would be some kind of support for you. If you needed to go to the hospital, there's Medicare. Johnson did that. Since the 1980s, they have dismantled all of those social protections for the economy's losers. And at the same time, they have found ways to make people make even more money by forcing regulations, by removing regulations, by allowing billionaires to put unlimited funds into campaigns. So the more you deregulated capitalism, so let me be very clear. Capitalism was a creative, innovative force that built the world. But when you started to dismantle the guardrails, you started getting more and more poor people, more and more rich people. And the irony of this, and so why do I point out the UK and the US? Because these are the countries that have done the most deregulation.
Yeah.
If you go to France, for example, France has kept some of those protections. So what happened when the far right was about to win an election? People rallied and they lost because they still felt that they had
saw
some
the
stake in
value.
the system. Yung iba kasi wala na kasi, like I said, unbridled, uncontrolled capitalism has devoured democracy.
Yeah.
And ironically, a lot of the people who supported Trump are the same people who dismantled all of those protections. So they've managed to find a way. Oh, don't blame us. Blame black people. Blame gay people. Blame Muslims. So parang na distract sila
Yeah.
Para ka ng socialist magsalita, Ricky, re-recruitin na ka sa akbayan.
May isang
Hindi
news.
ka na parang liberal party,
Pero hindi ba totoo? Hindi ba totoo? I mean, why is it that it's held in some countries and it is not in others?
But I mean, Trump is not the right person who will bring back social protection.
He's not, and I don't think he is. But people, I guess that's where the disinformation comes in, right? So people have said he's gonna, and you've weaponized yung othering of other people. So, diba? So people don't always vote in their own interests. Sometimes they vote for emotional reasons.
Yeah.
And they'll regret it later on.
The vibes.
Kagabi nga, guest namin
The
yung
feels.
dating foreign minister ng Ecuador. At yung kasama niya na member ng Progressive International. Sila Varoufakis, dating finance minister ng Greece. So, guest namin sila kagabi sa isang bahay. No? Ang tinanong ko sa kanila, no, ay anong tingin nila sa populism? Dahil may mga philosophers na progressives na hindi negative ang tingin sa populism. Ibig sabihin, pwede yang agawin sa mga reactionary right-wing forces. No? At may sinabi dyan si Gramsci, may sinabi dyan si Baudrillard, no? Yung simulacra and simulation. May sinabi diyan sila Clow and Move, no? So may mga leftist, progressive philosophers na nagsasabi, wag nating iwanan ang populism sa kanan, sa recidivist, reactionary elements. Dapat gamitin din natin. Of course, how ay kinakailangan pang i-craft yan. Dahil ang traditional populist ethos, no? Create, exaggerate a problem, and exaggerate yourself as the solution. No? Yung ganun ganun yung weaponization, katulad ni Trump. Pero nagmamarka. Yun ang problema eh. Walang nagmarka sa'yo na plataforma ni Kamala. Pero may nagmarka sa'yo na problema at solusyon si Trump. Kaya nga sinasabi ng mga iba, gawin din na, for lack of a better example, parang si Hugo Chavez sa Venezuela. He was a populist, but he was also a leftist. No? So ang sinasabi nila, imbis na iwanan mo yan kay Erdogan, iwanan mo yan kay Modi, iwanan mo yan kay Oban, kay Trump, etc. Bakit hindi rin nating i-weaponize o i-strategize according to our terms as progressives? No?
Aligned with the values.
Yun yung isang debate. Naalala ko lang nung pinag-uusapan.
Agree ako dyan, boss.
Kaya ba yun?
It's about messaging eh. It's about messaging.
Mga sir ang
yun ang expertise. Yun ang expertise nila, Ricky eh. Yung mga messaging eh. Di ba?
Ayun ba?
You were gonna say something.
No, kasi di ba part of the populism is also to create an enemy so that the people rally behind you. So Trump was able to create talaga an enemy. I mean,
pero ang enemy nila Trump ay yung weaknesses or yung mga excesses ng neoliberalism na ipinapaliwanag ng aking fellow socialist na Ricky Carandang, no? Ayun yung ginagamit na dapat mga progressives ang nakakagamit eh. Yun ang nakakapagtaka, nakakagamit yung AfD sa Germany. No? Yun ang nakakagamit. Sila Le Pen sa France na muntik manalo, no? Talo, pero imagine mo, muntik na, nagsama-sama na lahat para labanan sila. Sa Netherlands, no? Imagine mo, Sweden, tsaka Finland. These are the classic welfare state. Paano nanalo dyan yung mga right-wing populists, no? Ibig sabihin, yes, I agree with Ricky na hindi naman nangyayari all over the place. Pero, saan ba sila nanggaling? Nanggaling sila sa margins. Ngayon, nasa mainstream sila. Yun yung kanilang victory. No? At kung hindi mapipigilan yan, baka yung mga nasa gitna, yung nasa sa mainstream, baka sila yung mapunta sa margins. Katulad nga nung kausap ko na isang Democrat kanina. This is going to be a long conservative winter, no? Dahil nga, partly dahil makikinabang si Trump dun sa reforms na ginawa ni Biden, at partly on the horizon, parang wala masyadong unifying leader ang Democrats pa, no?
Herman, what does this long winter mean? Not just for the US, but also, we'll bridge it na to the Philippine, to us here in the Indo-Pacific, in the Philippines. What will this mean for us?
Well, yung long winter kasi, if you think about it, you're looking at a situation na kung saan Trump is institutionally limited to one remaining term, right?
Hopefully.
But that means kung sino man yung susunod has the prospect of 2 terms, right? So kung Republican yan, no? So you're looking at a possible situation kung saan 12 years of a Republican administration could be
the youngest
and
vice
this
president.
specific kind of Republican administration,
Yes.
not just any.
So in other words, if you're looking at this is a situation na kung saan within the next few years kailangan the Democrats will have to actually come up with their own counter messaging that would actually be able to disrupt yung success in being able to convince the American electorate about ayun nga, the importance or the possibility that only the Republican Party could actually change the situation that's being faced by that Americans are so disappointed with, no? So yun yung long winter mo kung tutuusin, no? But what does it mean for all of us? Kasi it goes back to, I think, the point that was made by both Ronald and Ricky na parang, and Marites also talked about this earlier on, no? what's the spillover, right? The effect that this victory of a right-wing populist, no, or right-wing populism, no, in the United States, what's going to be the spillover across the world, no? Like what Marites was pointing out about our earlier conversation, no, when Trump won in 2016, it emboldened right-wing populists, no, in Europe, right? Are we seeing the same thing? Well, the interesting thing is, going back to what Ronald was actually saying, no, hindi naman ito inevitable. It's not a path-dependent kind of situation. Remember in Brazil, no, nabaliktad yung Bolsonaro won and then Lula, no. Similarly, as has been mentioned, no, in Europe, nagkakaroon ka ng pushback, no, against the strength of right-wing movements, no. So it's not an inevitable thing, so to speak, right? But yun nga, the issue here is the situation in the United States has something that we hope will not be too extensive, in terms of its effects, no. But we do see the possibility that it will actually further embolden, no, groups, no, who share, no, and sa kanila ideological talaga, no. You're really talking about mas anti-immigration sila. I mean, hindi mo maintindihan kung gaano kaseryoso si
ideology.
So it's that's what I'm actually much more afraid of, right? Na parang ano yung magiging spillover effect nito, no, as far as the more ideologically committed groups, no, in places like Europe, for instance.
Right. Let's go back to the data quickly and talk to Gaby. Gaby, again, NERV had this extensive study on the U.S. public's media consumption behavior in the lead up to the 2024 presidential election. So based on the information ecosystem of the U.S., Gaby, how did we reach this long winter? Papauso na talaga natin yung long winter na yan. And is there no way to... are we simply, kumbaga, have to surrender and hunker down for this winter? Or is there also still a way, given your findings, for the U.S. to go back to the center at least, right?
Well, I guess, to be honest, nakakalungkot naman talaga yung findings ng study. But we mentioned earlier that the information ecosystem is incredibly fragmented right now. When you look at the full report, the full information ecosystem report, we came to this long conservative winter because the right-wing audiences online, they're very much in their own bubble. We do have a network map also that shows that we have a left-leaning audience that does, consume mainstream media more regularly. And then you have a very, very insulated right-wing bubble that they have their own alternative news sources. So, of course, these kinds of alternative news sources, they have amplified different conspiracy theories. So we mentioned also immigration, pitting white Americans against people of color, other immigrants, and other divisive issues as well. And then of course they appeal to this kind of emotion. They make you angry at a certain other. So for instance, they make white Americans angry at, let's say, immigrants for supposedly stealing their jobs. You also have
the dogs and the cats.
Yes, of course, they'll be eating your dogs and your cats. Good gut issues as well. Gut issues for them. So of course, I think it's it's going to be very difficult for America to, I guess, move back to the center, move left, because of course, as we're seeing on social media, everyone's getting their information from different parts of the world.
Yeah.
There's also been a lot of talk that the Republicans, they relied on influencers. They have, Joe Rogan, who's been making, these, different issues, very, appealing to the bros of the Republicans as well. It doesn't help also that you literally have, ex-CEO Elon Musk, who has quite literally backed Trump in many ways and also has altered the platform policies in such a way that, these dangerous conservative voices are amplified, even if they promote, hateful content, disinformation. So there's been a lot of talk for liberals, and the Democrats also, should we make our own Joe Rogan? Should we also be, more aggressive and, fighting for our policies, I guess trying to speak that kind of language as well. There's a lot of talk because honestly, it is very, it's pretty bleak to say the least that, everyone's got their own information. Everyone's got their different information sources, so it will be very difficult, I think, to be honest, to kind of bring those bubbles together.
Gaby is the bearer of harsh realities for us. If you could zoom back into the just show the audience lang yung graphic kanina. This is a graphic specifically on abortion discussions on Facebook. If you notice that the red part is quite less information sources. It's much smaller. The blue side is a little more dense. So mas maraming... Tama ba, Gaby? Yung pagbasa ko ng...
Well, it's more like, I guess, like the left-leaning cluster. As you can see, there are some mainstream media sources that they still do consume. So, of course, they're still closer to the facts, while you see that the right-leaning cluster, they're a little further away. They've got their own right-wing media, different alternative sources that they're listening to. And of course, I think we've seen that in different countries. We've also seen that here in the Philippines, where you have the more liberal factions, like you're relying on fact checks, debunking different claims being spread by different political groups, factions, whatsoever. But we also notice in our other research for the Philippines, propaganda in Philippine elections, that fact-checking content doesn't necessarily penetrate those right-wing audiences who amplify conspiracy theories. Because conspiracy theories, they play on emotion again, and of course, we have social media platforms that really amplify those posts that will elicit a lot of hate and anger from you. So naturally, the way that big tech designed these platforms, we don't really see as much news, as much facts as we do, conspiracy theories that make people angrier. So that's what we're seeing in the US as well.
Actually, hypothetically, it would have been interesting to see a battle royale between an Obama and a Trump. Dahil nung lumaban si Obama noon, siya yung disruptor against the status quo, yung Republicans, no? Yung Republicans noon ay hindi populist like Trump, no? Si Obama may certain level ng populism, no? Bagamat institutionally ay talagang dinedepensahan niya yung mga mahalaga institutions para sa Democrats. Pero from left field, bigla siyang sumulpot no? First term senator, pero may mensahe. At nagmarka yung mensahe niya. Imagine mo kung yung dalawa yung magkatapat no, na gano'n. No? Dahil nga, halimbawa, sa Pennsylvania, there were 900,000 Democrats knocking on doors. Asama na nga ng loob ng mga kinakatok nila dahil 12 beses na may kumatok na Democrat. Pati yung mga umuuna, no? Naasar na umuuna kami, tapos kakotok pa rin kayo. Pero talo pa rin ng Democrats sa Pennsylvania. Halos walang ground war si Trump. Sa kanya, air war lang. Di ba? So, makikita mo rin yung difference no?
Meron din siyang mga door.
Pero hindi
not
ganun
as
kalaki.
extensive.
900,000?
Yun yung lamang ni Kamala in terms of funding.
Game.
Elon Musk funded the door numbers.
Who, by the way, may just be, I don't know what exact position he will be holding, but
A new position ang hinihingi niya, a new department.
Czar, no?
Domestic policy advisor.
Or something.
Ba yung kanyang hinihingi?
Alam ko na, Department of Mental Health.
Department of Hot Takes and Bro Takes on Twitter. X pala, sorry. Twitter. No one calls it X. Anyway, we bring back the conversation closer to home. What does Donald Trump 2.0 mean for the Philippines? Obviously, the US is a treaty ally. A lot of our external defense rely on the US. Although, like you mentioned, Marites kanina, di ba, parang there's a lot of diversifying that's going on, that is still going on, has been going on in the past few years. But what will this mean? Let's go to the Philippines muna. What will this mean for us?
No, siguro it will be maybe the broad strokes lang kasi we don't know yet sino yung magiging defense secretary niya, sino yung magiging NSA, State Department. Although one name has been mentioned repeatedly, Robert O'Brien, and he wrote a piece in Foreign Affairs, pinag-uusapan.
At State?
At State or NSA. And Robert O'Brien came here during Duterte's time, And he was a hardliner when it came to the Philippines' sovereign rights over the West Philippine Sea. So that's very good news for us if he returns to the Trump cabinet, because he was the former NSA. So yung mga ganon. So since we know that Donald Trump is transactional, like he wants Taiwan to pay up for its own defense, kaya i-abandon niya yan. Parang under the radar tayo as far as his campaign statements are concerned.
Yeah.
Kung babatayan mo yung kanyang policy statements during the campaign about the South China Sea, about China, no? Kung titignan mo yung kanyang mga advisors, kahit hindi pa yung ma-appoint, at least yung closest advisors niya, tingin ko wala masyadong pagbabago dramatically. Maliban perhaps sa Taiwan, na for the first time in 50 years, ay iniwan ng US yung kanilang strategic ambiguity, no? Ni Kissinger at ni Nixon. At last year, sinabi ni Biden, we will defend Taiwan militarily. Maliban doon, na major na pagkakaiba yon for the past 5 decades. Pero, ang sinabi lang naman ni Trump ay gumastos kayo. Depensahan namin kayo, pero gumastos kayo. Pero sa South China Sea, tingin ko baka nga mag-scale up pa siya in terms of freedom of navigation. Dahil
What it means.
Kailangan nilang protektahan yung 3 to 4 trillion na global trade na dumadaan dyan. Tatamaan ang supply lines ng US kung hindi nila protektahan yan. At konektado dyan, yung West Philippine Sea UNCLOS decision. No? Hindi yan may hiwalay. Baka yung Taiwan, pwede mo pang hiwalay. Pero yung West Philippine Sea at saka yung freedom of navigation, mahirap hiwalay. Pero ang pinakamalaki na baka nga mas hawkish pa si Trump is a trade war.
Ayun.
Dahil doon, klaro yung sinabi niya na tataasan niya ang taxes primarily sa China, secondarily Mexico, no? Yung mga cheap products ang pumapasok. Although may contradiction yung kanyang sinasabi. Dahil gusto rin niyang tanggalin ang inflation. Inflationary yun eh. Pag yung main source mo of cheap product, tataasan mo ang taxes, that will create inflation. Kaya may mga ganong klaseng contradiction si Trump. Parang immigration.
Kaya rin nag-surge yung Google searches ng tariffs.
Tama.
As the vote was being
Parang
counted.
Immigration. Sabi niya, 20 million ang illegal. Ang sabi ng Homeland Security, 8.5. No, magkaiba sila ng numero. Parang si Digong at Pidea. No, sabi ng Pidea ay less than 1 million ang addict. Sabi ni Digong 3 to 5 million. So parang ganoon din si Trump sa immigration. Pero ang problema ni Trump, ang nagtatrabaho sa farms sa US, sa West Coast, are all mostly illegal migrants. Wala namang puti na kukuha ng trabaho na yon. Sino yung maglilinis ng imburnal? Sino yung mga kasambahay? Sino yung mag-walk the dog? No, napakahalaga sa Amerika ng mga pets eh. No, kahit sinasabi ni Trump na kinakain ng mga immigrant. So, yung trabaho na yan, pag tinanggal niya, sino papalit? So may ganong klaseng contradiction yung mga statements niya. Although ako, sigurado ko, yung mga undocumented na may mga kaso, uunahin yan. Tapos susunod dyan yung asylum seekers, uunahin yan. No? Tapos siguro, pipili siya, tatargetin niya yung mga undocumented na hindi nila masyadong kailangan.
Na hindi
no? Na hindi nila masyado. So, ikakalibrate niya. Huwag niyong kalimutan, mas maraming dineport si Obama kaysa kay Trump. Nung presidente si Obama. Kaya, baka mag-backpedal din siya dyan. Dahil nga, it might cost na yung mga trabaho na walang ibang gustong kumuha.
After victory comes reality, Ricky.
It's difficult to predict what's going to happen to us because we don't know the forces who are influencing him. We don't know what impulses are driving him. Tama nga si Ronald, wala siyang masyadong sinasabi about the Philippines. But what we know for sure is this. America under Trump is going to turn more and more inward. It's going to disengage increasingly from the world. And it has a deep skepticism of the processes and institutions that were put up by America itself post-war. WTO, NATO. So I don't think they're going to say, we got to defend the South China Sea just because, right?
Because of the rules-based international
Yes, that has to make sense to them from a transactional point of view. Sabi mo transactional point of view. So could that mean that if we play that right, does that mean we can maintain our defense? At least until we can find some more reliable source of defense, or di ba, parang mahirap sabihin eh.
Yeah.
But if their skepticism towards these treaties and these institutions sounds to me like maybe we need to make the case. Because why would he send troops to defend a country half a world away
Yeah.
that's not even white? And let's not forget that we're not the target. I mean, China isn't trying to invade us. China's prize is Taiwan.
Yeah.
And they want to retake Taiwan. We are important in as much as we are a way of projecting American and Western force to defend Taiwan.
Yeah.
So we're not the main player. We're just sort of the guy on
But
the
we're
side.
an important.
But kahit papano, tatamaan din tayo dyan. But I think the Taiwanese probably need to be more worried than us.
Right. Right. Sir, there was a lot of effort leading up to the elections. No, parang there was a bipartisan delegation of legislators, including the older brother of former Vice President Pence, who came here and talked to military officials, politicians, the media, reassuring us or drilling over and over again, no, there's bipartisan support. You're very important. You don't have to worry about the 500 million foreign military financing. Ano yun? Can we, is that enough for us to be confident na at the very least yung existing commitments will play out the way it was promised under Biden?
Ricky's point about hindi tayo yung target. No, it's China, right? So in other words, what the situation in the Philippines now depends on how things go as far as China actually goes. No, so parang what I'm reminded of is in 26 or when the first Trump administration actually took place, right? North Korea was actually a target of very heated, Trump rhetoric, if you remember, right? Where did that lead to? No, them being best friends, right?
Little Rocket Man became his best friend.
Exactly.
Love letters.
Right?
Yeah.
So, in other words, all of a sudden, the threat to actually use that bigger button against North Korea disappeared. Okay. Similarly, in other words, what I'm thinking of is, okay, how does Trump deal with China, basically? One of the things that we've been talking about and we've been hearing from the US now is that if there is a bipartisan issue for American politicians, right, it's China. No, both Democrats and Republicans basically have the same kind of position as far as China is concerned. But Trump has never been, a politician in that kind of sense, right? If he's going to see an opportunity in terms of dealing with China, then kasama na dito yung issue ng trade war, kung manenegotiate niya to, if some sort of transaction can actually take place, then that might actually be something that changes Trump's approach, as far as China is concerned. But like I said, we have to wait for what happens when Trump actually comes in. The other thing that I'm actually concerned about right now is we just passed those two laws, right? Yung archipelagic sea lanes, as well as, of course, the maritime zones law.
Yeah.
Yung maritime zones law, the US is okay with that.
Yes.
In fact, we're supported as far.
They did not react to the archipelagic.
The archipelagic sea lanes law is actually something else, right? Kasi there's a big disagreement between us and the Americans, as far as those passageways that we've actually
Kasi tatlo
defined.
lang yun.
Tatlo lang yung sinabi natin. They wanted more than that, right? So, I don't know how that's going to affect our relationship with the United States under Trump, if that's going to be an issue that he might actually raise with us. In other words, they might start talking about gusto nyo suportahan namin kayo. Then,
Damihan niyo yung
ninyo to, di ba? Tignan ninyo yung niyo yan. So, in other words, it makes us more vulnerable in that sense, right? So, it is incumbent upon us not to be nimbler as far as our diplomacy is actually concerned. Right? Both with the United States, and this issue of actually diversifying our support, So it's a good thing for us to actually be much more proactive as far as approaching our other supporters around the region. I'd actually, and this is a conversation Marites and I had a few months ago, no? Na parang kung meron tayong weakness as far as our diplomatic support is concerned, no, there's none from the region. Right? Ang ano natin is that malakas yung suporta natin galing sa Japan, sa Australia,
The West.
South Korea, and then of course the EU.
And then nothing from ASEAN.
But from Southeast Asia, wala eh. No? So parang we need something much more robust, no, in terms of our diplomacy as far as the ASEAN states are actually concerned. No? Baka mamaya doon tayo, yung isang bagay na kailangan natin i-buttress kung tutuusin, no?
And to add to that, yung recent na ASEAN, sir, the president made very strong statements.
Right.
And in the end, walang nakuha.
Nobody took it up, right? So
Because ASEAN has been engaged in the last 20 years in a very effective diplomatic, not offensive,
engagement with China.
with
China.
ASEAN, right? Cambodia is very much pro-China in the way that we're seen as being very much pro-US.
Yes.
So
Malaysia's turn currently.
the others sort of
Also-
play middle ground. I think that's good for ASEAN, and I think maybe we should start thinking about engaging in a
ASEAN the same way?
in a similar way. I mean, we're too far already into the Western camp at this point. There's no way you can just suddenly reverse that.
Yeah.
But I do think that if we take a more nuanced approach to our relationship with the United States, be more clear-eyed about what we can expect from them and what we cannot, and then go to China and make some kind of peace with them that doesn't sacrifice our sovereignty
Our own
too much.
Sa China, they will never abandon yung mga tinayunan nilang mga military bases dun sa artificial islands. That,
Hindi na. Wala na.
100% sure ako, hindi nila iiwanan na yun. Hindi na sila atras. Yun yung torn na delikado dahil yun yung, kumbaga, para sa kanila ay uncompromising na sila. Ikalawa, the agenda of the People's Liberation Army, the more hawkish within the Communist Party of China. Talagang sa kanila ay kailangan namin yung kanyo yung resources nyo sa West Philippine Sea, especially the oil and natural gas. Kung hindi, paubos na yung aming pang-finance or pang-pondo ng aming industry at manufacturing. No? So, tingin ko, willing sila makipag-negotiate yan. Pero bibigay ko sa inyo 5-10%. Sabi nyo 90%. So, yun yung medyo hirap natin in terms of negotiations with China. No? Kaya, isang dahilan din yun kung bakit tayo napabaon sa... Ang issue para sa US, baka hindi nga, sabi nyo nga, hindi naman ASEAN yung main issue sa kanila Dahil malinaw naman sa kanila ASEAN, least common denominator yan no? Pero ang mas issue sa kanila is Japan, South Korea, Australia. Ia-abandon nila ang Europe. Hindi nila ia-abandon yan. Ia-abandon nila NATO, pero hindi nila ia-abandon yung Japan, Australia, at saka South Korea. No? Kaya yun yung mas kaalyado natin dito no? Less ASEAN, at least militarily militarily. Pero by all indications, no? By all indications, yung ideological fundamentals ni Trump, yung MAGA, ay nakatali sa pag-check ng China economically. At hindi mo pwedeng iiwalay diyan yung military, no? Hindi ka pwedeng sabihin, hindi, economic lang naman yung aming gera trade war lang. Hindi ganun yun. Kinakailangan dagdagan mo yan ng iyong 7th Fleet, which is the biggest fleet ng Amerika at nandito sa ating rehiyon. No? So yun yung complication sa usapin na yan. Although ako kasi, I'm almost sure, hindi makikipag-away, hindi papasok sa isang gera ang China na malinaw sa kanila they cannot win. At least in the next 10 years or at least a generation. Dahil talaga namang malayo sila militarily sa US. Dalawa lang, unless magkaroon ng aksidente, may pumindot ng isang missile, no? Na wars are created by accidents, no? Less by design, no? Ikalawa, kung ma-weaponize nila ang kanilang quantum science in the next 10 years. No? Which means, hindi na kailangan ng 17 aircraft carriers katulad ng US kumpara sa kanilang 3 at yung 2 ron refurbished pa from Ukraine. No? Paano ka lalaban? No? Kahit ang laki ng Navy mo, yung quality ng Navy mo, ang layo. No? Unless ma-weaponize nila ang quantum science, quantum communication, which means na ma-hack nila yung mga computers ng mga aircraft carriers ng US, very pragmatic ang Communist Party. Hindi yan pupunta sa gera na alam nila hindi sila mananalo. No? Kaya yung sinasabi na, uy, malapit na yung gera sa South China Sea because of the tensions. That's not true. No, that's not true.
ang ano kasi ng China, they're going to push the envelope, right? Parang yun ang gagawin nila. In terms of, they're not really going to go to the point where they're going to challenge the United States militarily. Hindi yun yung laro nila. Although Taiwan, of course, is an iffy kind of proposition. Pero ang ano niyan is that, and this goes back to yung question para sa atin kasi, no, na baka mamaya ang ano natin is, what might be important for us would be not so much to, nasabi mo kanina na hindi sila bibigay as far as yung bases nila doon sa mga artificial islands, no. Baka mamaya kailangan natin manage yung expectations natin na parang kung makipag-usap tayo, na okay. Going back to Ricky's point about kailangan maging realistic tayo about how we look at the United States, right? So, kumbaga, clear-eyed, no, in which case we might have to actually change our tack as far as China is concerned, no. Baka mamaya question kasi dyan is, kailangan yung expectations natin, i-manage natin. No, we're not going to push them out of those artificial islands, no. But what is it that we want them to do in the meantime, right? So, halimbawa, magbago lang yung behavior nila sa mga mangingisda natin, sa mga Coast Guard ships natin, halimbawa, might be something that we might look at as a
low-hanging fruit.
Something pwedeng ano, di ba? Kaya lang, ayun nga ang ano dito is, it depends on, it's really going to depend on what Trump's actually going to do. No, yung first ano niya, as far as his foreign policy is concerned regarding China.
And I'm sure
problema lang natin doon sa mga artificial islands. Aside sa ginawa na yung mga military bases, the biggest floating carriers, ay minimeasure nila yung kanilang territorial waters.
From there.
Which means talagang tatamaan, hindi lang yung ating EEZ, ang tatamaan yung ating territorial waters. Sinong gobyerno ang tatanggap nun? No? Unconstitutional yun. Babagsak yung gobyerno. No? Kung alam mo, Philippine government. Alam mo, kahit yung Duterte government na very pro-China, no? Na pumapasok dun sa 40-60, no? Ay hindi natuloy no? Dahil nga ay may ganong klaseng complications sa ating konstitusyon, sa ating mismo mga batas. Lalo na ngayon na meron tayong mga bagong baseline law. Meron tayong bago. Ngayon, yun yung magiging problema for any Philippine government na paano ka magde-negotiate? Ano yung bottom line mo? Ano yung minimum mo? Sa ngayon, ang position ng China, itong aming artificial islands, dito namin susukatin ang aming territorial waters at ang aming EEZ.
Kakalabasan nila ng baselines. We can talk about this a lot more. I guess when we find out who exactly will be holding state, defense, NSA ng US, kasi feeling ko kahit sila din ngayon, hindi nila alam kung ano yung patutunguhan ng bilateral relationship. So we'll be inviting you again in a month or two maybe. Now we jump to the last topic at hand, or second to the last, immigration. Again, very strong yung promises ni President-elect number 47 on immigration. There's no point in speculating if he'll actually do it, if he has the facilities to do it, if the bureaucracy will allow him to do it. But what can the Philippines do, considering na anong last estimates ng Philippine Embassy of illegal Filipinos with illegal status? Si Ambassador Bea Romualdez has already said or advised Filipinos with uncertain status na umuwi na lang muna sila. Umuwi dito. Of course, that is easier said than done kasi kung pwede lang silang umuwi, siguro marami sa kanila umuwi na matagal na. What can the Philippines do? Can we negotiate? Can we diplomacy our way into at least, you know?
Medyo weird yung statement ni Ambassador Romualdez na yun. Dahil inunahan mo pa si Trump no? Doon sa, at usually, dapat ang gagawin ng embassy natin, ang ambassador namin, kahit ano mangyari, tutulungan namin kayo. No? bibigyan namin kayo ng mga
Sinabi niyo
abogado.
naman, meron
We
daw,
will-
may funding naman daw.
Oh,
sa
we will.
kanya.
Yun yan.
Di, pero dapat sasabihin mo, we will negotiate with the American government.
Hindi yung
diba?
defeatist.
I think he's managing expectations.
Ang una mo sinabi kasi, uy, na kayo, kusa na kayong bumalik. Dahil kung hindi kayo babalik sa Pilipinas, hindi na kayo makakabalik dito. And actually, mahihirapan ng makabalik yung overstaying. Dahil usually, yung mga TNT, overstaying na yan eh. Paano pa sila makakabalik? Kaya i-risk na lang nila na mahuli kaysa yung kusa silang aalis as hindi na talaga sila makakabalik. Dahil sa kanilang records, overstaying na sila. No? So, medyo weird lang yung statement ni Ambassador Romualdez.
It was uncommon for an ambassador to say that. But going back to my point, he's trying to manage the expectations of our people who are living there. We kind of think we're walled off from this anti-immigration talk that we're somehow some kind of special status to the Americans. We're not. We're not. So, ingat lang tayo mga kababayan na nasa US. Things are gonna get a little uncertain.
Yeah.
Diba? So parang, I think tama naman yung sinasabi. Well, maybe not correct.
Maybe
Exactly, but
not in that manner.
Maybe not in that manner, pero tama yung sasabihin niya, oy, medyo uncertain ang mangyayari sa atin ngayon bilang Pilipino na nakatira sa US. So let's be careful. I guess maybe he could have said it in a more diplomatic way.
We will negotiate with President Trump. No, okay.
Is there a way to negotiate? Realistic ba yun na pwede natin kausapin?
Di ba hindi pa clear kung sino yung mga i-deport? But sabi naman ni Ambassador Romualdez, he gave a number of Filipinos who have their papers in order.
Pending.
Oo.
Just waiting for it to process.
So, at least naman, sabi niya, they're in good condition. Yung mga tao.
Ang problema, dahil nga uncertain si Trump, baka nga yung naturalized, but denaturalized pa eh.
He made that.
He made that.
Hindi lang to usapin
Stephen Miller actually
Hindi lang to usapin ng undocumented, no? Of course, uunahin niya. Sabi ko nga kanina, uunahin niya yung may mga criminal records, no? Which are basically mga Hispanics. Uunahin niya yung mga nag-file ng asylum, no? Then marami yun eh.
Yan, marami.
Ilang libo rin yun eh. So, tapos, tsaka niya pupuntahan, ito, targeted. Yung mga undocumented na tingin nila hindi madi-disrupt yung American economy. Halimbawa, yung agriculture, wala silang papalit doon. Sino ha-harvest ng kanilang mga prutas, ng kanilang mga gulay? No? So, baka sa iba silang sektor magfo-focus, yung hindi masyadong tatamaan. No? Then again, di natin sigurado kano karampat yan, gaano kalaki ang deportation na yan. Although, kinakailangan niya din niya mag-play sa kanyang crowd. Dahil nagpromisa siya eh. Di ba? Hindi rin niya pwedeng ipagpag lang yun, no? At titirahin siya ng kanyang mga, dahil taas din ang expectation eh, ng mga bumoto sa kanya.
Low-hanging fruit yan sa US politics because even liberals think immigration is broken.
Yeah.
Diba? They have different ways of figuring out how to solve it, but everyone says it's broken. So, tama si Ronald, dyan siya titira. So, unang titirahin niya is immigration.
Actually, kung mas klaro nga sana si Kamala doon, baka mas may dagdag siyang boto. Pero ganun-ganun siya eh. Kaya talagang na-solidify ni Trump yung immigration issue. Paano siya yung siya yung czar eh, sa immigration eh, as vice president.
We tried to
Kaya doon siya tinitira.
solve the core underlying issue.
Parang fracking yan eh, nag-flip-flop siya eh. No, yung
on immigration.
I agree basically with the idea na calibrated yung magiging policy.
Kasi hindi rin kaya ng sistema
hindi
nila
po pwede na lahat kagad.
Yung fantasy niya na isang bonggang deport, hindi kayang gawin yun logistically.
So but at the same time, kailangan may gawin siya. Kasi nga this is one of the key issues para sa niya eh. Para sa base niya, hindi lang yung mga bumoto para sa kanya na for this election. So which basically means parang it has to be something that feeling ko baka mamaya hindi vulnerable ang parang Filipinos are probably not as vulnerable as some other groups, no? They're not going to be the first ones targeted, no? But at the same time, may matatamaan diyan kahit papaano, no? So I agree. I guess Ambassador Romualdez could have said it much better.
Kinder way.
No,
probably.
but at the same time, he's right.
Yeah.
No, na parang this is a situation na kung saan we're not yet sure how things are actually going to be done by the Trump administration.
And with that, I think it's time to wrap up this conversation kasi nga, 4 pang taon. Marami pa tayong time. Mag-isip, mag-overthink, problema, mag-isip ng solusyon sa pag-ayos ng democracy in the US and the Philippines. And
Autumn pa lang, wala pa yung winter.
Maghihintay pa lang tayo dun. So, any final thoughts on what it's been? I mean, it's only been a week since election day. Marami na tayong iniisip. But at the same time, again, with the disclaimer now, there are a lot of things that are yet to be determined. The final lineup of his cabinet, for instance, the officials that will be most crucial for the Philippines. Hindi lang Defense, NSA, and State Department, but also trade, right? Kasi malaki yung promise, you have the whole Luzon corridor. Any final thoughts, ladies and gentlemen, before we wrap this up?
Hindi ko lang mapalampas yung statement ni Digong, ni Bato, at saka ni Robin Hood Padilla na very close sila kay Trump. No? At kumpare ko to. Kumpare ko to, sabi ni Bato, no? As if ay matutulungan sila sa kanilang mga problema, no? Eh, hindi nila kilala si Trump.
Sabi niya makakabalik na siya, 'di ba? Parang yun yung sinasabi ni Senator De La Rosa ngayon.
Kaya sila kinausap noon dahil sila yung gobyerno. Sila yung presidente, sila yung chief of police, no? Ngayon baka hindi na sila kilala niyan. Kahit nagkaraoke sila at kinantahan ng My Way, no, si Trump, no? Ay medyo wishful thinking at best or stupid, no? Mas ganun pa. Kaya hindi ko lang mapalampas dahil
ang bright kasi ng politicians natin. But anyway, ako ang takeaway ko dito, I think we discussed this earlier, that the Philippines has started to export its brand of politics. Not just to the US, earlier we did this sa Indonesia, na nung tumakbo sorry to discuss this a bit, but nasusurprise ako na mabenta pala tayo. We're exporting our politics. But this is for another discussion.
Another kind of soft power.
Kasi 2016, 2022, compressed in one consequential election in America. And this is
isang
never
pala
stopped.
sinasabi nila, tumataas ang chance namin sa 2028. No?
Sino?
Yung mga Duterte. Dahil ang kaibahan, si Trump pataas yung approval rating eh. Nung natalo siya nung 2020, umabot siya hanggang 31%. Mababa yun, ha? Pero eventually, nilampasan niya si Biden. No? Eventually, nilampasan niya, pataas siya. Yung mga Duterte rito, pababa. In all surveys. At hindi by increments. Dramatic. Ngayon, hindi pa malinaw sino yung papalit sa kanila. No? Will that be the Tulfo? Will that be a new pink wave? No? Hindi pa ganun kalinaw yan. Pero ang malinaw, no, ay nag-unravel sila. Unlike Trump na pataas nung panahon na yun. Kaya mahirap na ikumpara na dahil nanalo si Trump, ay, mananalo rin sila sa 2028. It doesn't equate eh. No?
Ibang realidad kasi.
Sabi mo nga, masyado sila matalino eh.
Tsaka ito na yung information, a different reality. Ricky, and then we go to Gaby, and then you will have the honor, sir, of closing this discussion.
It's what I said earlier. I think this is if we're going to take anything out of this as Filipinos, let's have a more clear-eyed view and a more pragmatic view and a less romanticized view of our relationship with America. It's another country that's looking after its own interests, the same thing that we should be doing. Let's look at it from that point of view.
Gaby?
Siguro what I have to say also is that because we're very close with America, I feel like this might be, I guess, like something that we've all noticed, that there are lots of parallels with the US election 2024 and the previous elections in the Philippines. I feel like the world should also be watching what social media manipulation in the Philippines actually looks like, so that they get a better idea of how things will unfold in the US. Like when, the fact that Trump had, he never conceded to, losing to Biden in the 2020 elections, and look where he is now, like stronger than ever. And, that's I feel like that's something that we've seen also here, that, we have sitting President Marcos, he never conceded to the his loss in 2016, and he also came back better. And we've seen similar narratives also on social media that of course that they stole the election, etc., etc. So I feel like the world should also be watching what happens in the Philippines as well, so that people get a better understanding of how this could unfold in the US elections, because the US is a bigger geopolitical player, definitely. we currently are witnessing how everything that happens in the US will definitely impact all of us. Online on social media and offline as well, definitely.
Final thoughts, sir, given that we are a trendsetter, apparently, in misinformation and in greater political trends, and given the fact na ilang buwan na lang, we will be holding our own elections.
Right.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I can only talk about the geopolitical situation.
I think it's better that way.
Well, it's simpler in a sense, right? To a large extent, what this does for us is it forces us into a situation where we need to borrow Ricky's point about being clear-eyed about our relationship with the United States. But it's not just the U.S., and I think that's the point here, right? That we need to broaden our horizons in terms of how we should actually deal with our region at this point in time. So to that extent, looking at things in terms of whether we're going to be supported by the United States, as far as China is concerned, should probably be not the be-all and end-all of what we take out of this particular situation. But it really forces us to be much more strategic about how we think about our regional environment, the geopolitical situation, and maybe take less lessons in terms of how this affects, how our politicians will be thinking about the next elections here in the Philippines, right? I think the implications for us are really to be much more nimbler about how we think about, how we deal with our regional environment right now.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. There are a lot more things that we can talk about, pero may 4 years pa tayo of US under Donald Trump. We invite you to join us as we continue the conversation. Not here, don't worry, uwi na tayo in a bit. But please download the Rappler Communities app. The QR code is currently flashed on your screen. Look up the US Vote chat channel that will transform into security and global issues a few days from now. There, you'll be able to access our coverage. You'll be able to access me and my colleagues. We'll be there to discuss issues with you. Kasama na rin doon yung unpacking of not just issues but feelings related to current events. Every now and then, we'll bring in experts to give us insights over at the Rappler Chat app. All right, that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching. This has been Bea Cupin. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining me tonight. Thank you for keeping tuned onto Rappler. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Gaby. Thank you, Patrick, in Pennsylvania, for sharing your insights to our viewers. Thank you for joining us. This has been Rappler's special panel discussion on the U.S. elections and Donald Trump's upcoming second presidency. I am Bea Cupin. Good night.